Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. Today's show is part 2 of a 3-part interview I did with Preston Dennett, author of Not From Here, Selected UFO Articles, Volume 4. What, Preston, is the oldest sighting of a UFO report you've uncovered?
They reach back. That's a tricky question. I'm going to say caveman times.
Wow.
I can't say that I personally uncovered it, but looking for evidence of ancient aliens, you will see that there are, in fact, cave paintings showing what look like modern day flying saucers. So this is pretty much before recorded history. And if you really want to go back that far, there's a lot of evidence of, petroglyphs as well. Ancient writings in pretty much every culture. We know the Romans saw them. They called them flying shields. We know there's evidence of this in ancient India because in the Vedas, their scriptures, they talk about vinyanas, flying machines. It's all through the Middle Ages. There's wood carvings, which clearly show flying saucers. Pretty much every indigenous culture across our planet talks about, quote, sky gods who came down and taught early humans culture, agriculture and medicine and science and all these sort of things. So the evidence for ancient aliens is really quite compelling. The earliest case I've personally investigated is the 1920s. It goes way back, way back. They've been around for millennia.
Extraterrestrials have many different agendas. One of them, bizarre as it seems, appears to be an interest in fertilizer. Why?
This was something I really wanted to research because the most famous case in the world is, of course, the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961. This was an interracial couple. Betty and Barney Hill decided one day they both had a vacation from work, take an impromptu drive through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. They saw a UFO. They didn't realize it at the time. They had missing time. There was part of the trip they could not account for, about 2 hours. They came home much later than they should have. These weird little details started to add up that pointed towards them having not just a sighting. Barney's shoes were strangely scuffed up on the tops. He had no memory of how that could have happened. Betty's dress was torn in a way that she couldn't understand. There were these weird shiny spots on the hood of their car, which if you put a compass up to it would spin wildly. Betty started having dreams of what we would probably call grays and being taken on board. Had all kinds of memories of them showing her around the craft, being physically examined. They showed her a star map. This later became very famous. Showed her a little book with symbols in it. All kinds of things happened. And Barney, meanwhile, is also having some memories, flashbacks, physical symptoms of anxiety and blood pressure was going up. So it became clear to them something more had happened. And they started searching for answers. This is when they were visited by 2 scientists who were kind of quietly also researching UFO encounters and were particularly interested in missing time cases. This is Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, mainstream scientists who went to the Hills' home and started asking them all kinds of questions, really going in depth. And it was after talking to these gentlemen that the Hills realized, oh my gosh, we've had missing. But these 2 gentlemen, Homan and Jackson, asked them a question which really threw Betty and Barney Hill for a loop. They asked them, do you have any nitrates in your car on fertilizer? And they're like, what are you talking about? What kind of a question is that? No, we don't. After a few moments of thinking about this, they're like, oh, wait a second. They in fact had a bag of fertilizer in the trunk of their car, which they had neglected to take out just out of laziness. There seemed no reason to take it out. They went on their vacation, this bag of fertilizer in the car. And Homan and Jackson stated flat out that they believed there was a connection. They had interviewed previous contactees who had worked in the nitrate industry or the fertilizer industry and had encounters and missing time encounters. So this became a real topic of inquiry, which was never satisfactorily answered in terms of the Betty and Barney Hill case. It was just kind of dropped. Holman and Jackson never revealed their previous cases that pointed towards this. But I always wondered about it and thought, why hasn't anyone followed this up? Let's look into this. Are there any cases? Is there a connection? And I found some really interesting information. Particularly, there was this one case which occurred on April 24, 1964. It's a very well-verified case involving a gentleman by the name of Gary T. Wilcox. This occurred in Tioga City, New York, Wilcox, who was a former military officer, well respected by his neighbors, not a sort of a nobody. I mean, he really was a good witness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at any rate, he was out in his fields. He saw something coming down off in the distance. So he tromped over because he's got quite a large farm. He's a dairy farmer. And he tromped over to the field where he saw this thing coming down, and sure enough, there was a saucer, a typical flying saucer. And he's not thinking, UFOs or ETs at this point, kind of walking around this thing thinking, first thought was it was a fuel tank from an airplane that had fallen. But as he got up to it, he realized it wasn't. It was far too large. I guess it's a refrigerator that somebody dropped here, but how would it have gotten here? And as he got close, he realized, oh my gosh, this is a strange aerial object of some kind. Maybe it's military. But then a door opens and out steps two figures who are actually fully suited up from the tips of their toes to the tops of their heads. In fact, you couldn't even see their faces. And they spoke to him in flawless English out loud. And he wasn't sure where their voices were even coming from because he couldn't see their lips moving. But he said their voices were male. There was no accent to them whatsoever. So he couldn't really tell. Because he speaks several different languages. He was in Europe in the service and knew different languages. So there was no accent at all. And they proceeded to have over an hour long, about an hour and a half long conversation where they told him all kinds of things. And when he was later interviewed by UFO researchers, he refused to comment on some of the things the ETs told him. Basically said, no, too sensitive of information. I was told not to talk about it. The Air Force did express interest in his case. He was later interviewed by them, but he said some of this information was very personal just for him. They did tell him, he later revealed, they gave him a prediction that one of our astronauts would die in an accident that year, which turned out to be true. At one point, the conversation came around to fertilizer. They were very interested in how he was fertilizing his field and what he was doing. They told him that they get their nourishment from the atmosphere. They don't nourish themselves the way we do. He explained that, we eat plants, we use fertilizer to help the plants grow. And they actually asked for a bag of fertilizer. This was towards the ends of the conversation. So he says, I can give you a bag. And he went back to picked up an 80-pound bag of fertilizer, hefted it up on his shoulder and carried it back. And the craft was gone. So he's like, He put the fertilizer down right there on that spot, walked back to his farm and reported his case, and went back the next day. This bag of fertilizer was gone. So there is apparently, at least in some cases, certainly an interest in fertilizer. And I did find other cases pointing towards this. Not a lot, but there were some out there. I mean, the contactee Howard Menger met human-looking ETs. They basically told him they are very much interested in gardening, organic vegetables and stuff, and grew very large vegetables, and he devoted a good portion of his book towards the end towards organic farming methods that had been taught to him by the ETs. And I found another case, this case is so weird, involving a farmer from Mexico who became world famous. His name is Jose Carmen Garcia. He became super famous when he started bringing vegetables to the local market that were 4 times normal size. Collard green that were almost 6 feet tall, 10-pound onion, a 60-pound cabbage. And these were good vegetables. They were tasty, they were nutritious. And when he kept bringing these in, people were like, where are you getting these? How are you growing these? And he said that he had been given a secret formula by extraterrestrials, and he didn't reveal it for a long time. It later was revealed to be apparently some sort of a meditation that he does over the seed, grow better. And it was duplicated later by other people, I think in France and a few other places. But the Mexican government became quite interested in his case and actually sent researchers and got their very best farmers and scientists to try and duplicate it. And we're not able to. 3 times short in terms of the crop yield of this farmer, Garcia. And he became world famous for this, especially when an American came and visited and was gifted a 10-pound onion by Garcia and came back to the US and wrote about it for Home and Garden magazine in San Diego. This really got the ball rolling. And what's interesting about this case is it's 100% verified. There are many, many photographs and hundreds of witnesses who have seen these giant vegetables, photographs of these giant produce. And this is a thing, I did start researching giant foods, and people do occasionally get, huge pumpkins or a world, record-breaking cabbage. Generally speaking, it's only 1 or 2. their crops are not all. And this guy could do it every time for years. He's now passed away. Yeah, very well verified case, which again speaks towards this connection here. I found a few other cases of UFOs hovering over fertilizer plants. There was one case, Texas, in Borger, Texas, where a witness saw a UFO fly directly over the agrium fertilizer. Entirely clear whether it was directly interested in it, but I think it may be, given this connection. And another case that really solidified it for me occurred in 1968 when a 12-year-old girl, Miss Amato, they did not release her first name, woke up one evening. This is in Winstead. She heard something going on outside. Looking out her bedroom window, saw a UFO landing across the street, so quite close up, sent on a little beam of light as like a ramp, and out came 10, 15 little figures, 3 feet tall, all with jumpsuits on, which went directly to the building across the street. This building was an abandoned railroad station that was being used to store large amounts of nitrates, fertilizer. Appeared to be very much interested in it because they went straight to this building, climbed on top of it, and were looking down through the window there at all the fertilizer. So yeah, I think there might be a connection here. Not super strong, but it makes sense because there are so many cases where UFOs are coming down and the ETs are picking flowers and plants and collecting soil samples. They are scientists at heart, I think. I think this is just part of their agenda to explore and understand what's going on, for that matter, other planets, I'm assuming. But yeah, there is an ET fertilizer connection. I think it's important people know about it.
Contact with UFOs is often a spiritually informative experience. In some cases, it leaves the witnesses with superhuman abilities, including the ability to physically levitate. Could you, Preston, tell me about someone who had such an experience, the circumstances surrounding it, and how it affected them?
Very early on, when I started researching cases of direct contact, it became very clear to me, like as you said, spiritually transformative. As a general rule, contactees are profoundly psychic, and if not before their encounter, certainly afterwards. They start reporting, seeing, and experiencing a wide variety of paranormal events. So it's not at all unusual for people to come away from contact feeling like they can do hands-on healing, or start having out-of-body experiences, or precognitive dreams, past life recall, mediumship, seeing spirits, channeling. I mean, it just goes down the list. One of these after effects, if you will, is physical levitation. Mind you, I'm not talking about being levitated up a beam of light from a UFO. After the encounter, the UFOs are not around, people start physically levitating. I think the earliest case that I could find occurred in 1968. And it comes from a very well-respected researcher, Jacques Vallée, who was researching, I think, before I was even born. He had a case involving a medical doctor, very good witness, who was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, probably had an onboard experience because he did have a triangular mark on his stomach, as did his infant son. After being struck by this beam of light, he was healed of 2 conditions. Healing is a big agenda on part of the ETs. This speaks towards who they really are and why they're here, not to hurt us or scare people. They're very much interested in our welfare. In these healing cases, he was healed of an axe wound on his foot and also partial paralysis. So one of some 300 cases of healing, that I think is an important point. Following his encounter, in the weeks following it, he was in his home when suddenly he flew, rose right up off the floor, just kind of floating around his house. Quite alarmed him. He did not have control over it. Was not expecting this, and it happened twice, at least. So this is what I'm talking about here. People are psychically ignited. This is an ability we do all have. Physical levitation. I wrote a book about it called Human Levitation. This is present in all cultures. There are cases stretching back some 2,000 or more years of all kinds of people. Nuns and monks, certainly yogis, medicine men, sorcerers, people who are sort of the holy person of that culture, but not just that, children. Lots of spontaneous cases involving children, businessmen, housewives, you name it. There's a lot of cases of this. There's a UFO connection because I found other cases. Sure, you've heard of Whitley Strieber. He's a very well-known contactee, wrote Communion, Transformation, many other excellent books on this subject about his own experiences. And he had a levitation experience following an encounter. He woke up one evening, found himself right up against the ceiling of his home. Really quite disoriented at first. I was looking down, he saw his bed. Like, what is my bed doing on the ceiling? Only to realize, like, no, his bed is on the floor. That's his wife in bed. She doesn't have anyone sleeping next to him. You realize, oh my gosh, I'm not in bed. I'm floating up against the ceiling. What is going on? It says he was fully awake. There was no onboard experience involved with this. It was a spontaneous levitation event. And that's when I started researching this in more depth, because I knew that Bud Hopkins, the very famous researcher, author of Missing Time and Intruders and the Brooklyn Bridge case and other books about this as well. He had 2 or 3 cases involving people who had spontaneous levitation experiences. He wondered, oh, if these were events involving missing time. The witnesses said, no, you don't understand, Bud. There was no UFO. This was after the event. And I dug into the literature and I started finding more cases. I started asking around, had a family friend who had had a levitation experience as a child. I'd already interviewed her about it. Then I asked her, I'm like, I don't suppose you've had UFO contact? She says, well, actually, yeah. Doesn't really want to talk about it. She's very private about that aspect. It was a connection that I was expecting, and sure enough, it was there. And I started finding more cases. A case involving a lady by the name of Dolly Safran, who is the subject of my book, Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure, one of my more recent books. And after hearing all these cases while I was writing the book, I'm like, Dolly, don't suppose you've ever had an experience involving levitation? As a matter of fact, I have. She was having contact since a few months old. She remembers it all the way back. Many contactees have extraordinary memory, reaching all the way back really early childhood, far beyond what mainstream science says people can do. But mainstream science is wrong because I have many cases of this. And in fact, there are many people who have past life memory, which certainly mainstream science has refused to really even look at for the most part. Well, that also is gaining traction. Dolly reports a couple of levitation experiences at age 2. She reports other ones while as a young girl, climbing trees, jumping from branch to branch, jumping off the roof of the house. I think many of us as kids at some point try to do, and sometimes people will break a leg, but no, Dolly reports kind of like floating down. Even as an adult, I had an experience where she tripped and would have cracked her neck, head open, falling down the stairs, but didn't, floated down instead. I found more cases. I started asking all of my contactees that I'd interviewed. I'm like, this became a question now that I always ask. And it's always shocking. The lady I was interviewing from New York, she said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I don't remember it, but my mom says she came to my crib one day and I was just floating like 3 feet above it. I asked Ray Hernandez, a really prominent researcher in this field, if he has any cases. My friend and contactee from Florida, Alberto Fernandez, a government agent, actually had this experience as well. He didn't remember. He was asleep, but his wife woke up and Alberto was floating above the bed about 3 feet. And I was doing a podcast one day and I brought this up. And the podcaster is like, oh my gosh, I'm a contactee, as you know. I did, because he had talked about it. And he says, I had the same experience. So glad you brought it up. I never tell people. They don't believe you when you talk about this. But he says, as a young kid, he had that same experience. Yeah, I've got other cases. It took me a little bit to figure out what's going on here. This is part of the spiritual transformation that's connected to UFO encounters. We each have a bioelectric field, a natural human ability. Contactees often report how they can affect electromagnetic instruments. Computers will go out on them. Light bulbs will blow up. They can't wear watches. TVs fuzz up. Anything electrical. One guy I interviewed was a welder. He worked at a factory. He blew out the welding machine on so many different occasions. His employers aside that we want you to go to the doctor. We need to figure out why you keep breaking machines. He was physically examined, mentally examined as well, but they could not find anything wrong with him. But as a young kid, he was 5 years old, was taken on board over a period of a week, 3 or 4 times. Following that, he had a levitation experience. Well, actually, 3 or 4 of them. We would just spontaneously float up. Tried to tell people, they didn't believe him. One day he ended up on top of the roof. There was no way for him to get up there. They had to call the fire department to bring a ladder to get him down. So it's pretty well verified. This is really cool and a very important aspect of UFO contact because it shows one of the ET agendas, which is to wake us up to our own natural abilities of telepathy and clairvoyance and physical levitation.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy Not From Here Selected UFO Articles, Volume 4, how can they do that?
You can go to my website, prestondennett.weebly.com, and you can purchase it through the website. You can also contact me if you have a question or a comment or have a story to share. The books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other online retailers. I'm also all over social media if people want to reach out. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I really appreciate you having me on the show, Stan. I think this is an important subject, and it's time people wake up.
Preston Dennett, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. It's always a delight yakking with you.
Thank you. It's an honor and a delight for me as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of my 3-part interview with Preston Dennett. In part 3, I'll be talking with him about extraterrestrial hitchhikers, the areas on our planet most visited by ETs, and world leaders who have had close encounters with UFOs and aliens. So that you don't miss it, have access to past interviews, and be amongst the first to receive new interviews when released, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.